guys, welcome back to the channel where I cover missing persons, unsolved cases, crime news, and more. So a few of you guys were interested when I mentioned I could do a video a bit about Alexee Trevizo's attorney, Gary Mitchell. I have spent a good portion of today researching some of his cases, and I'm going to spotlight like 3 of them that are very well known. And he's pretty, like I said it before, he's a well known defense attorney in New Mexico. And as much as personally I'm not fond of his current lining of defense, from what we understand from media interviews for Alexee, every single defendant, every single accused deserves a lawyer, and they deserve to be represented because that is the rights of all of us in the United States of America. So I'm going to play a bit of this. This is actually a oral history piece that was done like a few years back with the State Bar of New Mexico. So this was a 2006, I believe, interview with Mr. Mitchell, and he's going to first speak a bit about why he does what he does. So I kind of wanted to let this come out. There's a lot of news articles about Gary Mitchell, but there's just not a lot of beyond that, who he defends and that sort of thing. So I was, like I said, I was looking for information on him and as well as his cases to get more of a idea of what kind of defense attorney he is. So I think some of these are going to really help us out for those that are interested. And I'm not going to play too much of this, but I'm going to play some pieces of it. So again, his first question he was asked is to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you do what you do.
I was born in Santa Fe, only because that was the closest hospital, and grew up on a ranch in a small farm, 18 miles north of Encino, which is up by closer to Clint's Corners, actually. I'm the eldest of 5 sons, and my dad and mom had a dryland farm and raised cattle. At least when I was there, we lived in a 2-room house without running water or indoor plumbing. We got water off the roof when it rained and put in a cistern, and otherwise we haul water. We had a garden and chickens and milk cows and cattle and raised pinto beans and a little corn. And when I went off to first grade, frankly, I hadn't been around people very much. It was an idyllic life. I loved it. I don't have anything but great memories of it. And I'm sure my mom thought differently, but for me, as a little boy, I thought it was just perfect. So the first day at school was just scary for most of us. We had never been around. I remember the first grade teacher showing the boys how to use the indoor facilities, which I thought was sort of funny later in life. And then, of course, great teacher. She'd been teaching for years. Great about teaching people how to read and write. So, small school, graduated from Encino. Out of the 14 kids in my class, 12 of us went through all 12 years together. So we were like brothers and sisters. And most of them ranch kids. Even if they lived in town, they still did that kind of work. And that's the kind of community it was. And the other good jobs, there were 3 other good jobs you could get. You could work for the school, which was the #1 thing in the community. You could work for the railroad, which was the best job to have. Or you could work for the highway department, which was about the 3rd best job you could get. My dad had a second job other than the ranching and farming. He worked for the highway department. So the inspiration for becoming a lawyer really comes from this reading and this history, but from my father, who early on, because all the men in that community had fought in World War II, and so they had that attitude of a lot of men that fought in war, and a lot of women that had gone through all the problems of a depression and a war. But they had a sense life is short, enjoy it, have fun, laugh, cut up, and work hard. Be honest. Sort of salt of the earth kind of people. So that was what I grew up with. But I remember early on my father saying to me about lawyers. And why I came up with this, I don't know, because he wasn't a lawyer and he didn't go to college even. But he always thought after World War II and the Depression, he would say to me, he says, you know, Gary, as long as there's the most important person in the community is a lawyer. And I'd say, why, Dad? How about doctors and teachers and ministers? He said, nope, a lawyer. As long as you have a good, strong, courageous lawyer in the community, we'll always be free. Well, he believed that. I'm not so sure today I would necessarily agree with him, but I still think there's a lot of merit to that.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty encouraging. And then in first grade, I'll never forget it. It's like it happened yesterday. I was the tallest kid in the class and the strongest and probably the fastest kid in the class. And we had a bunch of kids out. First grade, we're playing on the merry-go-round out, and there's only one little merry-go-round. And I threw some little kid off of it. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it was too much weight for me to push him all around. I don't know. But my father, who happened to be operating a state maintainer, happened to be grading the road right by the school. And he sees this. He stops. He walks across the playground, and he walked in that fashion that I knew this was not going to be fun. And he comes up to me, and he takes me aside from everybody else, and he looks down at me, and he says, you know, you're blessed more than any of the rest of the kids here. You're not only a better athlete, you're probably smarter than most, and you have an advantage. You've learned how to read and write before them. So I'm going to tell you one thing right now. You have a duty to help people and not be a bully and not to harm them. And any son of mine that's a bully, I don't even want around. Have we got an understanding about this from here on? And I said, yes, sir, we do. And from that day forward, from that very day forward, it's just been that attitude about, you know, if you're blessed with certain things, you have a duty to help. I remember that. And it's followed through all my life.
Yeah. How do you deal with that constant pressure of, if you make a mistake, someone may die?
Well, you know, people have asked me that question before, and I've never come up with a good answer. I don't deal with it. It's probably the best answer. I just don't think about it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm doing everything I can think of. I try to have a good relationship with the client. I'm trying to get whatever I need taken care of. But it's a fight, and I just don't think about it. And I do what I have to do. And the other thing is I try, and you can't, well, let me back up. You can't really do these cases without developing some sense of, some psychological barrier to having to deal with them, because you deal with the most tragic, because the victim's family on one side, on your side, typically tragedy in your side of the family. Normally you're dealing with moms or grandmothers, very seldom with fathers, but a lot of moms and grandmothers who have had nothing but hard work all their life and trouble with these kids that they tried to raise. And you deal with drugs and alcohol and mental health issues. So, a long time ago, I took the words of Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, and I've used them ever since. Abraham Lincoln, somebody asked him how he made it and how he managed to make it through all the horrors of the Civil War. And he says, well, it reminds me of this old man that got up in the middle of the night to go to the privy. And as he's walking through the dark, he trips and stubs his toe on a rocking chair. And the old man said, when asked about it later, it hurt. It hurt too much to laugh, and I'm too old to cry. So Lincoln was saying that about just the way you have to be. Yeah. And that's sort of what I did with these death penalty cases. I've seen some bizarre things in death penalty cases, far more bizarre than people would think. I've seen cases where the families wanted to fight one another, and so that's bad. But I've also looked back on a real high-profile case, and I look back in closing arguments. As a matter of fact, I'm giving the closing argument, and I'm in front of the jury, and I just happen to turn and cut out of the corner of my eye my client's mother and the victim's mother, and they're seated next to one another in the courtroom. And I turn around and look, and they're holding hands and sitting next to one another. That's New Mexico for you. Mm-hmm. You can't beat that. Both grandmothers or moms, they're both old enough to be grandmothers at the time, having gone through great tragedy in their life, understanding that, but understanding that neither one wanted this. Right. And understanding that life is so short you can't continue to fight one another. And no matter what you may wish, you're dealing with human beings. I thought of all the cases and all the symbols that I have, that one symbol of how you handle these cases, how you deal with them, and how the state has dealt with them, and the pressures you are under, that one picture of two grandmothers holding hands, both on the maternal patrons of their families, being together like that speaks volumes about the death penalty in New Mexico.
So I'm going to include the link, obviously, to this interview in the information of the video. Watching this, I kind of have a newfound respect for Gary Mitchell. I think he was raised in a different time, and he's out to make sure that justice is done and the accused get their fair trials. That does not mean that these people that he defends are innocent by any means, but it just means that he's taken on the role of being their mouthpiece and doing all that he can to defend them in court, and not necessarily get them off, but if there's a death penalty, obviously that's been a big strength of his as he's been speaking, that he wants to hopefully make sure that gets taken off the table, and maybe that this person spends life in prison. So again, that does not mean that I think any of these convicted murderers and what have you that he has represented in the past, and his current client Alexee Trevizo is at all innocent, or nor do I agree with everything that he has said in recent interviews about the alleged, and we have to keep saying that, guys, even though we all have our feelings and very strong feelings on that, about the alleged mom, what she's done to her child, her baby. At the same time, at least I have some respect for him. So I do recommend checking out this interview in its entirety if you have a chance to listen. It's just over an hour long, and it kind of humanizes him more, in my opinion. And our justice system needs to be this way. We need to be able to see that not only is the district attorney's office, important, and we have huge love for them, but we need to make sure that we have that respect for the defense team as well. I'm going to go over 3 of Gary Mitchell's well-known cases, and he's done like over 400 cases, and like I said, there's just so many out there. So I picked 3, and I looked a lot further into them, and these are 3 that really stood out to me, and that I was able to find some good information, so you can kind of not only learn a bit about the case, and again, if any of these you're interested in, I'm actually interested in covering any of them, to be honest with you, if folks are interested in, definitely let me know in the comments if there's something I mention here that you would like to see another video on. I'm always willing to take suggestions. This one is the Hollywood Video murders. This happened in 1996, and I'm looking back on this while I was researching it, This happened during my senior year of high school. So that gives you kind of dates me a bit here. 3 store employees were murdered during an armed robbery that went wrong on May 3rd of 1996. The suspects were Shane Glenn Harrison and Esther Beckley, and then they kidnapped and killed the grandparents of one of the employees in the Sandia Mountains. Now, Esther Beckley was the girlfriend of Shane Harrison. She actually turned state's witness and evidence, and she testified against her boyfriend. And Beckley pleaded guilty to 2 first-degree murder charges in the deaths of the grandparents, as well as 8 other charges in the case. Her plea bargain spared her the death penalty, and she was sentenced to 95.5 years in prison. So she pled guilty, and so Gary Mitchell did not represent Esther. He actually represented Shane Harrison in this particular case. Shane Harrison was charged with 5 first-degree murder counts, as well as 20 other charges. He was sentenced to 2 life terms, plus an additional 198 years. So 258 years total in prison over the slaying. So he's not going anywhere, and neither is she. At Harrison's trial, Beckley testified that she thought they would only be armed with BB guns when they robbed the video store and that no one would be hurt. So she assumed that they were just going to scare the employees, rob them, and leave the store, which was not at all what Harrison had planned. Instead, Harrison was armed with a pump-action shotgun and a Tech-9 semi-automatic pistol when they arrived at the video store that night. Actually, it was around 2 a.m. when this all happened, so it was in the wee morning hours when the store just closed. Beckley had talked her way into the McDougal's car. Now, that's the grandparents of the young man who was killed and that was waiting outside the video store. She told the couple that she knew their grandson and wanted to keep warm while she was waiting for him to come out. And she did not know him. Of course, that was complete lies. As the couple and Beckley waited outside, they could hear popping sounds from inside the store. Harrison was allegedly shooting the McDougal's grandson, Zachary Blacklock. He was only 19 years old, as well as the 2 other employees, Jowanda Castello, who was 18, and Mylena Dathier, who was 30. So he was shot and killed all 3 of the clerks working that evening. Harrison and Beckley then drove the elderly couple to a remote area in the mountains and killed them. According to Harrison's lawyer, Gary Mitchell, there's our lawyer here, his client was set up by Beckley and her sometime lover, John Lassell. So basically, his defense was that Harrison was not the alleged killer and was not at the scene of this horrific slaying. The defense told the jury that Lassell was the one present at the video store, not Harrison, and it was Lassell who turned both Harrison and Beckley into the police. So it was a big, whole love triangle sort of thing, and the jury didn't buy it, obviously, and they both are pretty much in jail for forever, for the rest of their lives. And there's video, actually, of the former defense attorney talking a bit about this case.
You know that this defendant is a mass murderer, and you know that he's our worst nightmare.
Former Deputy District Attorney Julie Altweiss, now Metro Court's chief judge, has handled a lot of high-profile cases in her 26-year-long career in the justice system. One that's not easily forgotten, the March 1996 Hollywood video murders.
5 people died, and it was just awful. It was horrendous all the way around, and I think that will always be in the memory of this community.
Investigators believe then 26-year-old Shane Harrison and 41-year-old Esther Beckley shot and killed 3 Hollywood video workers after an apparent robbery, then kidnapped and killed the grandparents of one of the workers, Pauline and George McDougal, who had gone to the store to pick up their grandson.
That was painful for the whole community.
Beckley pleaded guilty to killing the McDougals and testified against Harrison when Altweiss prosecuted the case.
Shane Harrison did this, no one else. It was, difficult emotionally and really, sad set of circumstances and heartbreaking. And, tough case. It's tough to have a 2-month-long trial where you're in the public eye that much. It was difficult, but it was the right thing to do. It doesn't make it any less painful that it wasn't a complete resolution, but I think justice was certainly done.
Now, 18 years after the murders, Harrison and Beckley continue to serve life sentences in prison.
So that was a big, high-profile case in New Mexico at the time. I remember going into my local Hollywood videos all the time back during those times, and from, the 90s all the way probably through like 2000. So how horrific, though. You're working in a video store, and this sort of thing does happen all the time, sadly, but you're working in a video store, these convenience stores, and and then just someone comes in and for no reason decides to kill you, and you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm glad that these two are in jail, and they are not going anywhere. But again, this was a case that Gary Mitchell worked, and he was the lawyer for Shane Harrison. So he's definitely did help him not get the death penalty, and which seems to be his big key, what he's looking for when he works a case. Then we have another case that was big, is the Cody Posey triple murder case in 2004. Cody Posey, who was then 14 at the time, murdered his father, stepmother, and stepsister on July 5th of 2004. The family was living on and working the Chavez Canyon Ranch, which was owned by ABC News reporter Sam Donaldson. He told police and a court that he did it because he was subjected to a lifetime of physical and mental abuse by his father. Posey went to live with his mother in 2000 after his father, Paul, gave up parental rights. And sadly, 3 months later, Cody's mother died in a car accident, which he was present for, so he saw this happen. He then had to return back to live with his father, whom he had an explosive relationship with. Paul Posey and his wife, Tyrone, both abused Cody, according to attorney Gary Mitchell. The abuse went on for 2 years before Cody hit that breaking point on the night before the killings. Cody states his father and stepmother attempted to force him to have sex with Tyrone. The teen refused, and his father burned him with a welding iron. Originally, when investigators began talking to Cody, he maintained his innocence. He then later, during that interview, admitted to getting a gun from his sister's saddlebag after having a fight with his father about cleaning the corrals. He then returned home with the intention of using it to kill his father. Cody then confessed that he shot his father as he was entering the home. He then shot his stepsister as she was right behind his father. He claimed he did not want her to be a witness and tell anyone, so that's why he shot her. And he wasn't very fond of her either. He then shot his stepmother twice in the head as she sat on the couch reading a book. He told investigators that he shot her for being mean and hitting him in the past. Cody then made an attempt to dispose and hide the bodies. He loaded them into a backhoe and buried them in a pile of manure. The grave was a shallow one, and law enforcement later located the bodies due to tracks leading up to the manure pile. After the murders, Cody changed his clothes and left a note for the police. The note read, "Sorry, coppers, I needed the kid to do the dirty work." He then told police he turned off the water and electricity to avoid waste before he left the ranch. At the trial, Cody spent 2 days on the stand explaining how he learned early on in life not to tell anyone about the abuse he was taking from his father out of fear of retaliation. He even thought he deserved the punishment for never being able to do right by his father. Cody was eventually found guilty of all 3 murders by the jury. The judge did decide to sentence him as a juvenile due to multiple pleas of leniency from his family. Cody was sentenced to the psychiatric treatment and remained in a juvenile facility until he turned 21 years old. Cody Posey was set free in October of 2010, so he has been free since the end of 2010. The last case is the murder of Victoria Martens in 2016. This one is highly disturbing, and I'm not getting into all the details here, but if you search it, it's really bad. It's already bad enough what I'm going to explain to you guys, but it's much worse than even this. On October 24th of 2016, the body of 10-year-old Victoria Martens was found inside of an apartment building in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Police had been responding to a 911 call in regards to a domestic dispute. Officers on scene discovered the dismembered remains of the child, which were partially wrapped in a burning blanket. Now, Michelle Martens, 35 at the time, her boyfriend, Fabian Gonzalez, 31, and Gonzalez's cousin, Jessica Kelly, 31, were all arrested on the scene and charged with first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in a grievous bodily harm or death, kidnapping, tampering with evidence, and contributing to the delinquence of a minor. All three pleaded not guilty initially. Little 10-year-old Victoria was drugged, sexually assaulted, so she was SA'd, and killed inside of the apartment. Michelle and Fabian later confessed to detectives that they injected Victoria with meth so that Gonzalez would have sex with her. So he forced himself on her, and this was not the first time, sadly. Victoria was then SA'd by Gonzalez and Jessica before they stabbed and strangled her. The three then left the child's mutilated body wrapped in a blanket after setting her on fire. That wasn't the first time that Martens hurt or allowed others to hurt her child, Victoria. In fact, she let others assault her daughter and took photos and videos of the horrific acts about a month before her death. Michelle Martens was sentenced to 12 years for her role in the killing of her daughter. Fabian Gonzalez was sentenced to 37.5 years, and Jessica Kelly, 44 years. And while that seems to be the story of what happened to little Victoria, we came to learn later on that that's not exactly the truth of what really happened to sweet little 10-year-old Victoria Martens.
She has a little girl inside the house.
How old?
How old is your daughter? 10. Oh, yeah, she's 10.
Police discovered 10-year-old Victoria Martens' body dismembered and on fire inside an apartment in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
It was August of 2016. I got a text early in the morning from a source of mine who said this is the worst homicide he had ever seen and that a child was mutilated.
Nancy Laughlin, a reporter from Albuquerque news station KOAT, has been following the case since the very beginning.
The information that day that we were told is that Victoria had been so brutally killed. I mean, she had been literally chopped up and set on fire. Her body parts were put in bags in different parts of the apartment.
The whole thing is beyond anyone's conception that this could happen, especially to a little 10-year-old child.
Within hours, they arrested her mother, her mother's boyfriend, and his cousin. They were all three at the apartment.
Victoria's mother, Michelle Martens, Michelle's then boyfriend, Fabian Gonzalez, and Fabian's cousin, Jessica Kelly, were charged with multiple felonies. The charges included child abuse, murder, and sexual penetration of a minor.
That day, what we were told was her mother told police that Victoria had been drugged, that she watched her daughter get raped and murdered. The first responders were horrified.
I've been involved in the criminal law for over 30 years, and this is the most inhumane case I think I've come across.
When Victoria's autopsy report was released in November 2016, it revealed she had been strangled to death. Some of the details put Michelle Martens' version of events into question.
There was no meth in her system, and that was something that I thought was unusual because the mother had said that they gave her meth, and they kept, investigating and investigating. January rolls around, there's a new district attorney, and he brings in some very seasoned detectives to review the case. They're looking at all the cell phone data and all the, any technology that they have there. And then it turns out as the evidence comes back, it's not matching what she's saying. So as the investigation continues, they figure out she gave what is called a false confession.
For more than a year, police investigated the false claims made by Michelle Martens.
The information that was guiding the initial investigation and the charging decisions in the case were based primarily on that statement. And we now know that that statement is false.
Her defense attorney was just saying that it's very, very rare, but Michelle Martens, she's a people pleaser. So if she's asked a question, she's going to answer whichever way she thinks that they want to hear.
It was completely made up. And so they went down, the investigators went down this road based on what the mother had told them, and that road turned out to be a complete dead end.
This is what they believe happened. So she gets off her school bus. She goes to the apartment. Fabian Gonzalez takes her to a gas station. They come back. Fabian Gonzalez and Michelle Martens. Cell phone data shows that they leave the apartment. According to police, they go buy some drugs from one of his relatives.
Cell phone and detailed Google location data corroborated those eyewitness accounts and definitively placed Michelle and Fabian outside the apartment at the time of the rape and murder.
They leave the little girl with Jessica Kelly, Fabian Gonzalez's cousin, who had just gotten out of prison and was staying at the apartment and has a long, violent criminal history.
Jessica Kelly's prior convictions include battery and assault of a police officer, among others.
Jessica Kelly, her version of events is that Victoria was in her bedroom, that the door was open. She says a man she didn't know came into the apartment and killed Victoria. Then he leaves. Then Fabian comes back with Michelle Martens, and they keep Michelle occupied. She doesn't check on her daughter. As the hours go on, investigators believe that Jessica Kelly and Fabian Gonzalez chop her up. They put her body parts in bags throughout the apartment, and then they set her on fire.
In addition to the cell phone data and new testimony, investigators also discovered male DNA on Victoria's body.
There was partial DNA found on Victoria's back that didn't match Fabian. Now, his DNA was found in other parts of the apartment, but on Victoria's body, there was partial DNA from another male. They checked with all the first responders, didn't match theirs. So it's a partial DNA, so it's really difficult to match.
There's a lot of emphasis that's been put on this unknown male, but at the end of the day, what do we know other than Jessica Kelly's story and the fact that there is some DNA, male DNA of an unknown origin?
The murder and sexual assault charges against each suspect were then dropped. In June 2018, Michelle Martens pleaded guilty to one count of child abuse resulting in death.
Mr. Martens, how do you plead?
Guilty.
She faces up to 15 years in prison.
Michelle Martens, Victoria's mother, she had met Fabian Gonzalez on a dating website. She didn't know him very long. He has an arrest record. She lets him move into her apartment with her 2 children, her daughter and her little boy. Soon thereafter, his cousin gets out of prison and he says, hey, my cousin's going to come live with us too. So she allows 2 people that she does not know very well to live with her children. And her little boy was with his biological father the night that Victoria was murdered. So by the grace of God, he wasn't there.
No contest.
In January 2019, Jessica Kelly agreed to a plea deal of no contest to multiple charges, including child abuse resulting in death.
The state says that she helped dismember her, that she set her on fire, that she lets this strange man walk into the apartment. He kills the little girl, and then he leaves.
Kelly will be required to testify against other suspects in the case and won't have to face a jury. She still faces up to 50 years in prison.
This poor child was tortured, and the story of exactly what happened to her is still in question, and it's disgusting. What is known is that she was assaulted and she was tortured, eventually murdered and dismembered. And there's so many horrific criminals out there, and they all need to, they need to pay for what they've done. And from what I can tell, they're still searching for this mysterious man who was there during Victoria's death. So hopefully that gives you guys a little more information about the type of attorney that Gary Mitchell is. Again, I think it gave me a bit more understanding of who he is. And I don't agree personally with being... I couldn't do it. Let's put it that way. I could not defend someone who has hurt or killed a child. But I guess we need people who can. Everyone's entitled to their day in court. Well, their days in court. And a good, well, a decent, hopefully fair trial. A fair trial is the biggest thing. And lawyers, attorneys like Gary Mitchell, are able to step up and be the voice, the defense attorney for these alleged horrible people. And so one of his next clients is Alexee Trevizo. So we shall see what happens. Again, there's a lot of motions coming up, like I previously stated, but looks like we're not going to have a trial until 2024. All right, guys, let me know what you think. Do you think any differently of Gary Mitchell, or do you still are like, whatever, could care less if he's a great attorney or not? I'm always for the victims here on this channel, and I believe most of you see that. But at the same time, I also want to make sure that justice is done and that it's a fair system, because we don't want to put away someone for the wrong crimes, and we want to make sure that our that everything's followed here in this country, that everyone has the right to a fair and impartial trial, and we don't have to agree with Alexee at all, and we definitely don't have to agree with her attorney Gary Mitchell, but at the same time, he has a purpose. That's what he does, and I am looking forward to seeing what happens in this case, and I'll continue to cover it here on the channel. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and most of all, stay safe.